come on up and do that.
When I heard about the grief recovery class, I really didn't think it was necessary for me. I had taken life, loss, and transition classes that were required for my degree in social work, and I really didn't think there was anything else I could learn that I hadn't learned already through school or through my experience on the job. But I had just lost my grandma on Christmas Day and decided I'd just come to the informational meeting, which will be tonight, in March. Even after that meeting, I was still not sure if I really needed to be there, but I decided to stick around. My grandma was the closest thing I had to a mother figure in my life. She was always there for me, even when my mother was not. It was a great loss. And then God started doing something in me the Sunday morning following that informational meeting. I became overwhelmed with emotion when singing the song Amazing Grace, My Chains Are Gone. As many times as I've seen this song before, it was the first time I'd really ever sang the song and actually knew what it meant to be free. I was born into a family that had struggled with anxiety for generations, and my mother suffered daily with anxiety, the kind of anxiety that takes over your mind and results in choices and actions that are made out of fear. There was only one way things could be done, and if you didn't follow that path of that fear, then you suffered the consequences. My consequences for trying to live independently of this fear that my mother suffered from was broken relationships, hurt, anger, guilt, shame, no self-worth, physical and emotional abuse, manipulation, rejection, and abandonment. I'm not talking about physical abandonment. My mom never left. The kind of abandonment I'm talking about is an emotional and mental abandonment. In some ways, I think this type of abandonment is worse. It's being physically present and mentally absent. Kids who grow up with this type of abandonment wonder what is wrong with them that their own mother does not want to be close to them. Worse is that when they are mentally focused on you, it's a focus of negativity, a focus of shame. But my mom loved the Lord. There was no question about that. Anybody who knew her knew that God was important to her. But much like everything else in her life, her religious life was run by fear. It was almost as if she did not believe that God ever gives anyone grace, that we are not allowed to make mistakes. I have a problem thinking that someone can be a Christian and suffer this type of mentality, because grace is the good news and the main point in our love story of Christ. My mom died when she was 48. It was the first death I had experienced in my life. The feelings I had when she died were confusing. I was sad, but not for her death. I was sad because I knew I would never have the chance to make her happy, to make her proud of me, to prove to her that I was worth having a relationship with. I was angry. I was angry because the emotional abandonment I had experienced over my life was now sealed with a physical abandonment. I was angry because the dream that I had longed for my entire life was permanently destroyed. I would forever be an emotional orphan, never experiencing in this life what it is like to have a genuine mother-daughter relationship. Over the last couple of years, though, the Lord has been doing a work in my life, and He has been showing me areas in my life that I have royally messed up on. In short, I had spent so much time running from who I didn't want to be, my mother, and in doing so, I failed to see that I was running in the exact direction that my mother had her whole life. It is as if I had been running blindfolded for all of my 42 years, thinking I was running towards what I wanted. In fact, the Lord took the blindfold off, and what I saw rocked my world. Sure, I had managed to keep from doing a lot of the things that my mother had done in her life, but the driving factor in my run was the very fear that she had suffered from her entire life. After my hospitalization in 2017, I had begun Christian counseling, and it was through this counseling that I broke free from anxiety. So as I stood there with this realization as we sang My Chains Are Gone, it was that evening that the first grief recovery meeting was taking place, and it wasn't until I had pulled up into the parking lot at 6 p.m. that I heard God so plainly say to me, "You're not here because of your grandmother, you're here because of your mother." I suddenly made the connection between my worship experience earlier that day and what the Lord's purpose was in the grief recovery program for my life. I had broken free from the anxiety that had paralyzed my entire life, but I had never dealt with the lifelong impact that my mother's anxiety had brought. The grief recovery program is a program that is built on a foundation of honesty. That means in order for it to have an influence in your life, you have to be brutally honest with yourself and your partner in the program, something that I was not prepared for. I had lived my entire life hiding so much of my pain and draping a curtain over all of my family's imperfections, continuing to cover up the imperfections in my personal life in an abusive marriage as a parent, and after John and I got married as a wife. All of the program was influential in my healing, but there were 3 weeks in this program that had an incredible impact and just happened to be the most difficult for me. The first of those 3 weeks, we were asked to make a lifeline graph, and on the left end was birth, and in our very first memories, and on the right end was where we are now. Our job was to graph all of our losses between those 2 points. As a result of learning that there are over 40 types of life losses, I began to see just how much loss I had experienced in my life. I was embarrassed to even begin this graph. I didn't want to look like an idiot because I had to be honest and lay it all out, and I didn't want to look like someone who needed everyone's sympathy. I began writing things down to help me to put order to my timeline, and everything I thought of brought about a feeling of aggravation, and it made me feel like there was something wrong with me to have this amount of loss. Looking at all of the loss made it appear that I was an incredibly damaged person, and that was something I feared for so much of my life. It wasn't easy facing those losses. But then a week following that assignment, we had to pick the loss that had most impact in our life to begin a relationship graph one. I didn't think things could get any more challenging, but then I was faced with recalling all of the positive and negative moments in the relationship between my mother and I. I had to face the fact that there were not many positive moments in that relationship between my mother and I. All I ever wanted was to be loved by her, and the relationship that I did not have with her had been the thread that unraveled my life. As I began writing down all the experiences, I began to become angry and hurt all over again, and I couldn't even recall even one time in my childhood where my mother and I had done anything together, just the two of us. There were so many instances of hurt. I had spent my entire life thinking that there was something so wrong with me that my own mother would not show love towards me. I began asking, how am I supposed to forgive my mom when there's a huge hole in my life that will never go away, a hole large enough to distort my identity and make it unrecognizable, yearning for love that can never be satisfied by anyone else on earth? How can I genuinely forgive my mom when every single day I see and feel the effects of her abandonment, and how I struggle to find a healthy parenting style, and how I struggle with being who my children need me to be, and the pain of each moment that I face with my children where I think that I have gotten something so right and it turns out to be incredibly wrong? The answer to this was revealed to me in the remaining weeks, where the grief recovery program process took me to the completion I needed in the relationship with my mother. I learned that you can't hold the blessings being handed to you by others if your hands are full of the raw chicken guts of unforgiveness. Put down that mess and pick up the blessing. You can't hold both. The last few weeks after the program have been a refreshing time for me. I wish that you knew just how incredible the impact of this program has been in my life. If you are experiencing any type of loss, I'd highly recommend signing up for the next course. You won't be disappointed.